Welcome to A Better HR Business, the podcast that looks at how HR consultants and HR tech firms grow their businesses and how they help their employers to get the best out of their people. Remember, for show notes and downloads, go to www.getmorehrclients.com/podcast. That's getmorehrclients.com/podcast. Okay, let's get started.
Hello, welcome back. Thanks for joining me again. Good to have you along. I am really looking forward to today's conversation with Kate Graham. Kate is the head of content, labs and insight at Unleash. Now, with more than 18 years working in HR, talent and learning and development, Kate works with practitioners, business leaders, vendors and analysts to uncover trends and create research and content that supports the people and organizations powering HR tech worldwide. Kate also hosts Learning Now TV twice a month, and she's regularly chairing judging panels on various industry awards, so look out for that. And ever a glutton for punishment, Kate also recently co-founded the Women in Learning movement, which is working to create a better balance and greater diversity across our industry. So Kate, thank you very much for joining me today.
It's my absolute pleasure, Ben. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and whereabouts are you based today?
I am in not so sunny Cardiff.
Oh, lovely Cardiff. Great part of the world.
It is. The weather is questionable this time of year, but yes, it is. I moved back 5 years ago and I haven't regretted it for a minute.
Yeah, there is something special and fairly predictable about Welsh weather, but you know, we don't need to dwell on that.
Absolutely. Just bring your umbrella, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So great stuff. Look, we've got lots to cover, but could we start with maybe you just giving us a quick snapshot of your background?
Absolutely, yeah. So you talk about me being a glutton for punishment in the intro. I think I'm a glutton for punishment. I've been in and around the kind of the HR tech industry my whole career, which is more years than I care to count now. I'm showing my age. Started out on the vendor side of the market back in the days of classroom training and IT training. So moved from there into the kind of the learning technology world. And from there, have kind of expanded out into, had a sojourn as my own boss, where I worked with organisations around their messaging, their marketing, communications, right the way across HR, talent and learning, and then spent 5 years at Fosway Group. So analyst, again, working right the way across kind of HR, talent and learning. So I've kind of expanded out. I always say, like, learning and development feels like home turf for me, because that's where I've been in and around my whole career. But now at Unleash, I find myself having conversations daily around things like payroll, workforce planning, like the whole kind of gamut really of HR tech. So I always think of it like a bit of a spectrum. Work right the way across that. And I kind of feel like a lot of the things that I've done in my career have almost led me to this point in this role, because I kind of have by this point a pretty good knowledge of the market and the audience, and some of the pain points that people in organizations are trying to grapple with every day. And it's a bit of a cliche to talk about kind of post-pandemic, but clearly, you know, the COVID situation exacerbated a lot of the challenges that HR was already facing, but also kind of brought HR to the table, I think, in a new way. And actually, as much as, you know, I would never underplay the kind of the impact, obviously, that the pandemic has had, it is also a huge opportunity, I think, for HR as a whole and as a profession, but also for organizations. And it sounds a bit cheesy, but I think to be able to step back and put people at the center, we've seen that suddenly it's not all about the people in the ivory towers that are the most important. It's actually the people on the front line who have got us through. And I think to have approaches and strategies and cultures in place that emphasize the importance of those people and their retention and their development, and their satisfaction and their experiences at work, that's all going in the right direction for me. So just to be a part of that conversation still feels like a massive privilege.
That's really good. And certainly it's almost one side of the dividing line or the other for companies with the whole great resignation thing going on, that the ones that are doing things properly and really putting people at the center, as you say, I would think that they're going to perform or come out better on the other side of this whole great resignation issue than the ones that are not focused on that aspect at all.
There's not a day that goes by at least where we're not having a conversation with somebody about this, but there's so many layers to what goes into creating that satisfaction and that culture. We're running a session tomorrow on diversity, equity and inclusion in hiring cultures, for example. That's just one strand of creating teams that are diverse and inclusive and rewarding to work within. We're doing something else next week around rewards and recognition, and the guy from there talks about how it's not just on managers and leaders to show rewards and recognition, it is on all of us to show kind of peer recognition, and how do you foster a culture in which that comes to the fore. So I just think and obviously there's pay, and all of those kind of things, is flexibility. So I think the kind of the multi-layered nature of the beast is kind of what keeps it endlessly fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I ask you to describe Unleash to people who don't necessarily know what Unleash is and what it does?
Yeah, absolutely. So we grew out of the world's biggest and boldest HR tech events. So previously known as HR Tech and HR Tech Europe. We actually grew out of in the early kind of 2010s kind of roundtables and very intimate sessions with handpicked HR leaders, and it's sort of escalated into, I think our last show was actually 2019, pre-COVID, but kind of 4,000, 5,000 people in Paris, big expo, big conference. We do events in the States as well. And unlike, I think, a lot of events companies chose not to pivot into just trying to take those events online during the pandemic, but actually took a step back and created a digital side of the business. So we have an editorial arm who are independent, so reporting on news, things like funding rounds, obviously are coming through thick and fast, all that investment side of the market, but also research, analysis, interviews with HR leaders, always trying to share that back with our worldwide community of leaders and practitioners around the world. So we, and my job is looking after content labs and insights. So I work very closely with both the events team and the editorial team to bring some of the commercial content, but also do our own research. So I was just sort of talking to you before about the Why HR Projects Succeed research, which is just crunching the numbers on at the moment, but also bringing things like the webinars, research reports, downloads, all of that kind of stuff to people. So I always think my job is about telling these stories and connecting maybe the vendor and supplier side of the market with the HR leaders and practitioners.
Yeah, bring them to life. And I know you guys do some great research. And as you said, the Why Do HR Projects Succeed research that's going on at the moment, that's a great project. So I remember reading an email about it. It was talking about how when more than 1 in 5 projects fail, what does it take to make them succeed, and learnings from that. So if you're listening to this, definitely go and check that out, because it's really interesting stuff. And when I see Kate's eyes light up thinking about the data, you can see she's a storyteller but a data analyst nerd almost at the same time. You've got both going on.
I do. I have to say I do miss my Fosway colleagues at times. I'm not naturally a number cruncher, but I'm working with a great team who are helping me do that. And I think it's when the dots start to become clear and you start to connect them, and you can really kind of get under the skin of what matters. And I was saying to you before as well, I sort of always have, marketing people will talk about personas and things like that. But for me, it's more, I always have protagonists in my head of, if I'm a busy HRD, I've got a million things to do. If I'm going to spend, 20 minutes of my precious day reading a report from Unleash, or if I'm going to spend an hour of my precious time going to a webinar, or 2 days of investment of time going to our event in Paris, what do I need to be able to take away from that? And I need to be able to come back to work, share some insights, and be able to do my job better or help other people do their jobs better. And that's what's always kind of front of mind for me, is that practical side of things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So on a practical side then, if someone is from an HR tech company listening to this, how could they work with Unleash?
From a provider, do you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I'm doing every day. So again, it comes back to that storytelling piece. So I think it's, how can we best help providers tell their stories? So for me, it isn't about features and functions of a platform, although obviously the capabilities and functionality is important for organizations when making selections. But I think from an Unleash point of view, it is about understanding what those providers can bring. I'm always looking for that point of differentiation whenever I talk to a new client. So, what part of the HR tech stack do they operate in, and how do they help their customers already? We're always looking for those success stories and those wins. And we always work very closely with the sponsors and vendors to get their clients to the table, because that's where I think we really see the value. So it's understanding really what their priorities are, the problems and the pain points that they're trying to help fix. Unleash has a very long history of working with startups, championing startups. We've always had the startup competition, which will be coming back for 2022. And that is all about looking at innovative ways of tackling those pain points in the market. Obviously, some of those get acquired very quickly and absorbed into kind of bigger suites and bigger solutions. But I think it is always having that finger on the pulse of the slightly disruptive element of the market and looking at how things can be done better, because there is always room for improvement.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Can I turn now then to something that I saw recently, and that was you co-founding the Women in Learning movement. Can you tell us what that's about and what led you to co-founding that movement?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2019, so I get my years mixed up now. Everything blurs into
Time stands still.
Post-COVID, yeah. So in 2018, Don Taylor, who chairs the Learning and Skills Group and the Learning Technologies Conference, published some data that showed that women were still not getting to the top of the learning and development profession. And I think their community is about sort of 12, 15,000 strong worldwide. And the data showed that in kind of junior positions within learning and development in-house, so not the vendor side of the market or the consultancy side, but in-house, so big organizations, the kind of the lower jobs were about 2/3 women, and then when you got to leadership positions, it was about 2/3 men. There's a very simple statistic, and one that almost just sort of passed me by at the time. And I think that within learning and development and within HR as a whole, as a woman, it's very easy to be lulled into a false sense of security because there are women everywhere. I know loads of really successful, HRDs, CHROs, CLOs. There were lots of women within the industry right across the board. So you go to, maybe another industry's event, again, pre-COVID, and, if it was pure tech or finance, you might find that women are more in the minority in the room, but actually at a learning conference or a HR event, you won't find that. You'll find a very sort of feels like a very equitable split. But when the data kind of showed that really they weren't getting to the top, that really kind of, I think it really triggered me, to be honest. And then Sharon Claffey-Calliope, who's based out of Boston in the US, had been working on the American side of the event circuit with Elliott Macy and some other event providers around women only type sessions, and how do women get promoted, and those sorts of things. So I think we're introduced to each other in 2019, and we just kind of both felt so strongly about these stats and really wanted to do something around it. So Sharon had the idea of bringing together a Women in Learning session at the Learning Technologies event, which we did. And then off the back of that, we were just kind of blown away really by the response. I think, we had LinkedIn posts with kind of 40,000 views, which just felt like a lot. And we just started the LinkedIn group, #WomenInLearning, and then kept the hashtag going alongside the conversation, because we wanted to be able to pull that in. And what we've seen off the back of that is people starting their own podcasts, people writing articles, editorial, people having meetups, again, pre-COVID, and just lots of people kind of coming together, even a book club, lots of people kind of coming together just to be able to kind of share experiences and really, I think, just unpick what are the barriers, but also I think in 2021, International Women's Day, they have a theme every year, and the theme for last year was Choose to Challenge. And another lady from the US, Dr. Jane Bozarth, who works for the Learning Guild, she contacted me about doing a piece of research around International Women's Day and the Women in Learning movement. And for that, we chose to challenge what success looks like, because actually success doesn't necessarily have to mean getting to the upper echelons of the corporate ladder. And I think this is one of the nuances for any gender, but I think especially, I'm 42, I've got 2 kids, I work full time, I work full on, and it takes a village for me to be able to do that. I'm lucky I've got amazing support and backup, but if you don't have that, and actually flexibility is more important to you, then maybe jumping off the corporate ladder and being your own boss and having that flexibility and being a consultant and working when you choose is more meaningful, and has had a bigger resonance of success than being at the top of that corporate ladder. So I think it's a really interesting area, and one that has been a bit hijacked, of course, by the kind of the COVID situation. But I'm very, very passionate about things like mentoring, and now I've always been really fortunate throughout my career to have people open doors for me, spend time with me. Actually, some of my best champions, my best mentors have been men, and that's great, that's fine. But I'm very aware that I've been very fortunate, and I want to be able to help pay that forward to the next generation of 20 and 30-year-olds coming up behind me as well. What do they need to help them succeed, and what does their definition of success look like? So I think for me, it's less about, I thought the measure of success when we started out would be to rerun those metrics that were originally run in 2018 and say, right, yes, it's half and half the women are now in leadership positions within learning and development. But actually, the more that time has gone on and the world has changed, I think those measures of success need to be sort of recalibrated and a little bit different now.
I pause because I think there are 2 streams to that, 2 parallel streams. One is, yes, that potentially people could become their own bosses, run their own business. I run a program called Start Your Own HR Consulting Business, so I get that completely. On the other hand, the other stream is for people who want to remain in the corporate world. I think we need to get those numbers 50-50, and then what you're doing there is driving that or supporting that, unpacking the issues as you mentioned, and try to find out what's doing that and drive cultural change.
And I think it's about belief, and I think it's about demonstration. I think I was listening to an audiobook at the weekend, and they were talking about how standing up straight, presenting yourself in a certain way, putting your best foot forward if you do all of that, then good stuff will come to you. I was a bit like, oh, I'm not, some of that is it was a bit simplistic to me, to be honest. But I think there is something about having that self-belief. Imposter syndrome is
huge.
It's huge with everybody. I don't think it's women specific, but it is something that I grapple with all the time. I left a job that I loved in a company that I loved to take the leap and come across to a new company that I love and a new job that I love. But it's terrifying to take that leap. But I knew it was the right thing to do, and I'm somebody that I think I'm fortunate enough in my life to have, as I say, great backup and great support, and that enables me to have the courage of my convictions. And some of that is about having the right support, but also some of it is almost like a muscle, like you have to exercise that and you have to have that belief. And you don't start off in your career necessarily in your 20s having all of the, I'm 40 and I don't have all the answers. So for me, it's very much about paying it forward. It's not just about younger people, of course, but I'm very, very conscious of kind of helping those up behind me.
Yeah. Oh, look, when I finished university, I entered the workforce knowing everything, only to discover. But to your point, on the it takes a village around the childcare issue. I think that applies also for the issue at hand on the Women in Learning movement, or hashtag Women in Learning movement, because yes, you got to build the muscle, and there's all sorts of things around mental barriers and confidence and so on. But equally, the system around you has to change to facilitate that growth and allow that growth to happen. So I love what you guys are doing. That's for sure.
Thank you. And I think it's really interesting. I mean, it's something I very much want to kind of come back to and spend a bit more time on and focus a bit more on. Sharon's been doing loads of stuff in the US. They've been having hybrid events and various things. And I think one of the slight misconceptions around it initially was that it was almost like going to become sort of like an organization or almost like a not-for-profit or something like that. But I think it's the hashtag piece is important for me, because I think it is much more about a movement, and what I want to be able to do is empower people. So if you live in Edinburgh and you wanted to have a meetup, you don't have to ask for permission to have a Women in Learning meetup. You just do it. And if you think about hashtags like Me Too and things like that, nobody owns that.
No.
And so I'm keen to be a driver and a supporter of it, but it's definitely not supposed to be, a vehicle for any particular person or any particular organisation. Thrive Learning, for example, is a company that's kind of picked it up and that ball up and run with it. They've done a couple of events. I spoke at an online event that they did last year. So Helen Marshall has done some stuff with that, but their CEO Sean has been really supportive, and that's just an initiative. They've taken that, no one's asked them to do that. Andrew Jacobs is a consultant in the L&D space. He's created a platform called Women Talking About Learning, and it's a podcast, and he's not been really involved in it at all in terms of the interviews and the discussion. He's trying to create a platform for other women, and I think that's amazing. Again, he's just done that off his own bag, and where things like Unleash, where I have a very real opportunity to influence it now, is things like I'm putting together webinar panels every day, and so what's the diversity split, what's the gender split? We don't want just the classic middle-aged white guys and manals leading the way at Unleash. That's not our way, and it's not representative, and we have a real kind of responsibility and a real opportunity to quite literally change the face of what people are seeing in the industry, and we take that really, really seriously. So I think it's just about having that thread through everything that you do, but enabling other people to pick up the ball and run with it as well.
It almost seems obvious, some of that stuff, but then just this week I saw a conference and I looked at the speakers and I went, well, they all look like me, white middle-aged males, and I was, wow.
Yeah, and I think it's called, again, it's calling people out on that stuff as well.
I did let them know privately, one of the
Yeah,
organisers I know, but
I think that's great. You don't have to be a keyboard warrior about it. You can be really polite. But I mean, today we're doing a session. Yeah, it happens to be one, kind of, I don't know if I should call him middle-aged, but one white guy who's leading the presentation. That's okay. Tomorrow we're doing a session on D&I, and you couldn't have a session on D&I if you didn't have a diverse panel. But it's not just about having the diverse panels for a session about diversity. It's about having that as a central tenet of something that you just do and you just pay attention to. And I think I'm trying to learn all the time, and it's been interesting going on this journey, even around the gender stuff. It's my cousin's now identifies as non-binary. That's been a journey for me, someone in my age group to go through and understand all that stuff. So I'm learning all the time. So definitely about 2 ears, 1 mouth. As well, and just pay attention.
That's great. Before I move on to my sort of final question around your advice on the marketing side for companies in this HR space, for people interested in the hashtag Women in Learning movement, there's no central website as such, is there? What should they do if they want to learn more about that?
No, funnily enough, that there is. I have got a domain that I need to do. I need to do something with, but there is a LinkedIn group. There's a couple of thousand people on there now, and it's really nice because it isn't just all women. It is a kind of, it's mixed. And that is hashtag Women in Learning. You can just search for it as a LinkedIn group. Annoyingly, the way that LinkedIn groups work means that we have to approve the people that come in, but there's not really, if you're interested, then absolutely the idea is that it's inclusive. And it was interesting at the time, we did get kickback. Should it just be a group for women? And we did a couple of kind of events and talks where we had men on the panel, and again came under fire for some of that. And Deborah Frances-White, I don't know if you've come across her, but she is the host of the Guilty Feminist podcast and has written a book by the same name. She was kind enough to respond to me and give me some advice, and she kind of said, you're always going to get flack if you stick your head up above the parapet. You're always going to catch some flack. But if your intentions are good and you're trying to build an inclusive space, then just crack on, basically, like be brave and do what you've got to do. And I think that's, again, there's a great message in there for everybody else. Like, it can be a bit scary to stick your head up, and we did get some flack from other women, which I was really surprised and disappointed by. But actually, it's sort of, that's where you learn, and that's where you grow, and hopefully that's where we help other people learn and grow as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, so if you're listening to this on the go, check out hashtag Women in Learning group on LinkedIn, and also just search on the internet, because it sounds like it's a growing movement and there'll be more and more down the line. So just to finish then, Kate, you've got so much experience on the marketing side and the HR tech space. Do you have any advice for companies in the HR tech space on how they can grow their businesses faster or in a more predictable way?
Yeah, I think it's about, from a product side of things, it's busy. It's a busy space. And don't just be an also ran. Don't, what are your differentiators? But more than that, don't just think about it from a marketing perspective. What are the pain points that you're helping people tackle? We've seen startups come through Unleash who have done, things around like text to speech, automation and AI around, CV screening, stuff like that back in the day. AI-driven engines that help assess skills that have since been acquired and absorbed into much bigger solutions. What part of the employee life cycle are you trying to help with, and how is that different to anybody else? And that might be a features and functions piece, or it might be about how you approach the market. But I think it's always, again, I come back to the piece about storytelling, and let people play with it. Let people who are on the ground have a go. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Get feedback from people who are using this stuff. The HR community is so, it's one of the reasons why I'm still here after all these years, is because they're people, and they really genuinely care about helping people in their organizations. And they're really great at giving feedback. It's part of their job.
Yeah.
So, and most of them have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of HR tech. They've been burnt. They've been, it's like dating. They've had the toxic relationships. They've had the bad dates. They've had all of that. And so if you're starting out in the space, I think the most important thing you can do is to try and get in front of people that know what they're talking about, be open with them and get their feedback, but understand the pain points that you're trying to hit and solve, and then communicate that really, really clearly.
Brilliant. That's great advice. Absolutely. Okay, we've covered so much ground. I really want to thank you for all you've shared today. If people want to learn more about you or about Unleash, what should they do next?
I am at Kate Graham 23 on pretty much everything. So you can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. I'm not really much of a TikToker, but it's there. So yeah, just hit me up. I'm always keen to have a conversation. If I can help or connect anybody, then that's a massive part of what I do. I love to kind of as I say, pay it forward. If you're interested in finding out more about Unleash, just search unleash.ai. You'll find our site. All of our editorial is freely available. I'm hosting webinars probably twice a week on average, so do come along. They're free. Just come along, say hi, join in the conversation. The community is really awesome. Our audience is really awesome, and I'm sure there's a massive overlap with your audience. So definitely just come along and get stuck in. Really, we'd love to see you.
Brilliant. Okay, so unleash.ai, and you're at, was it Kate Graham 23, was it?
Yeah.
Great. Excellent. Kate, thank you very much for sharing your advice and insights today. Really had a great time chatting with you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ben.
Thanks for joining us today on A Better HR Business, the podcast that explores the world of HR consulting and HR tech businesses. For show notes and downloads, go to www.getmorehrclients.com/podcast. That's getmorehrclients.com/podcast. Remember to subscribe and share the show with any friends who are busy growing a HR business. Thanks, and see you next time.